So good morning again. This is Kimon Onuma. Starting off, I'd like to acknowledge a few people that have been involved with this project from the DoD Military Health System side. John Becker, Director, Clayton Bonneke, and Russell Manning, who could not be here today, unfortunately. Clayton, I believe, might be showing up later. From the VA side, Renee, would you like to introduce who was involved?
I'd like to introduce our director.
Yes. Thank you for being here. And also Don Myers, Gary Fisher, and Renee as well. Andy, you're going to be speaking later from the max.gov site. And Earl, thanks for hosting the National Institute of Building Sciences hosting today. And Drew, who was involved with the project management of the project with DoD and VA on the DIMLS and SEPS project. And myself, architect, and we started with BIM Storms. Also have wear many hats, Chair of Technology and Architectural Practice. Youngkoo Kim, my team, who's online from our office in Pasadena. Mike Chipley, who's here, was involved with the project as a consultant. And Steve Hagan, who could not be here today, formerly of VA, also was a consultant on this project, these projects. Fred Harris, who's not here, but we have a recording of his voice that I will play later on, Assistant Vice Chancellor of the California Community Colleges statewide. And we have a lot of participants online and also in the room. See a large cross-section of different stakeholders from different organizations and agencies and consultants. A lot of different hats are being worn, and that was the intent of the session today, to kind of show the wide range as we start cutting across the different parts of the life cycle. And everybody obviously has their own view of this. The agenda is split into three parts. Part one, which we're in right now, introductions, and we'll be going into more detail about kind of a vision of what the day is going to be about. Part two, going into the SEPS, space and equipment planning through design, and we'll have a short break at the end of part two. Then in part three, we're going construction to operation, DIMLS, facility management. And we also have a lunch hosted by NIBS, and we'll have open discussions as well. So at the end of each section, we'll have discussions. I love this quote. I always start a lot of the discussion with this. This is from Andreas Phelps from Balfour Beatty Construction. The shelf life of a good idea is 6 months. If you don't share it immediately, you lose the opportunity. In other words, things are moving so fast today that we're used to kind of holding things very close and kind of using that as kind of, obviously we all have our reasons from a business perspective of why we do things. But probably if you have a great idea and you incubate it for too long, somebody else is already cooking it up anyway, so you might as well share it, because that's what it's all about today. If you don't share and you don't connect, your relevancy goes down. And that's one thought I'd like to keep today as far as looking at standards, looking at sharing. And that's the reason why we're here. We're sharing everything that we know about what we did on this project and more. And so is the VA and Department of Defense, so they've been very gracious in agreeing to share. In fact, Clayton, maybe you can introduce.
Hi, guys. I found the McPherson Square is not Franklin Square. For those of you who are, I thought I would try to change the pace, because we always come and get off at Vermont Avenue, and I thought, I'll just go this way instead. And that's why I'm wet and sweaty and late, because they're not the same, and I learned it the hard way.
Oh, we just got started, so maybe you can introduce who.
Well, yeah, I'm Clay Bonneke. For those of you who don't know, I'm kind of representing my boss, John Becker, and the key guy on our team who's been working with Kimon and his team, which is Russ Manning. If you want any technical answers, Russ Manning's the guy to go to, because he, and he'll be available tomorrow, but he wasn't available today. But I want to thank everybody for coming here and being interested in seeing what the kind of work that Kimon and his team have done. I think there are applications to other industries, other settings of the work that we've gotten done so far, and it's really exciting. We actually have a roadmap of how we want to proceed in the future. So again, I apologize for being late and sweaty. And without further ado, Kimon, you want to kick her off?
Thank you very much. So we were just talking about how we're sharing all the information. And
yes.
It's actually a great thing. All the documents that we're presenting today, and there's a lot more. We don't have time to go over everything. It's all half of the project is actually online. One of the two projects, the other one's going to be completely online with all the reports, the animations, the proofs of concept to generate discussions and thought about how this works. And also, and we'll go through this later as well, one thing that's very unique about this is obviously DoD and VA combined are huge. You guys have 210 million square feet of facilities, and you're faced with challenges that other owners are faced with. But even being that big, we realize that you're not big enough to actually solve this huge problem. It really has to be solved collectively, and that's really the theme today is how do we actually share that information and look for how we can actively partner with other organizations, and in fact even the private sector. We've even talked about as part of this from the healthcare perspective, who else is out there even in the private sector that would want to do this. So we're actively looking for participation in any way, actually. And we can talk about that more later as well. So shelf life of a good idea is 6 months. If you don't share it, it's gone, basically. It's not good enough to kind of keep things too tight. Obviously, you still have to have your own kind of proprietary your IP and what you're doing as an organization. But today, it's really not about keeping it really tight and closed. You have to at least find a way to connect to other parts of what's happening in the life cycle, for example. So the SEPS strategic plan, for those of you that don't know SEPS, it's the Space and Equipment Planning System that's been used for many years by the VA and DoD for defining requirements for healthcare facilities. So you have how many X number of patients and you're doing this kind of operations, what do you need? What's the spatial requirements and equipment requirements about that facility. There's also another project that Renee led called the Macro BIM project. We'll show more about this later as well too. This is about going from their requirements through design and ending up in construction. But those requirements, how are we going to look at them differently from a macro BIM perspective? And this was done through NIBS as well. Beck Technologies and Onuma were working on that project. So that's the second project. The third project is DIMLS, Defense, I can never remember the acronym correctly, Defense Medical Logistics Supply Support System.
I think it's support. Yeah.
Support. None of us can ever remember it.
No, I always forget if there's 2 L's and 2 S's or 1 L.
Yeah. So that's basically going into operation. So DIMLS itself covers everything from Band-Aids to facilities. So it's really a wide range. And the FM portion of DIMLS, facility management, obviously is focused on facilities. And this covers, this is used by the Department of Defense, DoD-wide, not by VA. There's similar, if you take the word DIMLS out of there and you think of CAFM and CMMS systems, there's similar things that happen obviously with owners on that. So that's the third project that was just, and all of these were just recently completed just in the last month or so. So part one, which we're in today, we want to go over just some visioning of what this is all about, industry trends, case studies from the California community colleges, trends in technology, the digital government, what the White House is saying about all this technology and how it's going to serve the American people, a quick review of the McKinsey report on disruptive technologies, things that are transforming our lives and business, and the Office of Management and Budget, introduction to max.gov, which Andy will be addressing. So if we step back and we look at technologies like global positioning systems, in 1973 the DoD developed GPS, obviously for use for defense purposes. In 1983, Korean Airlines Flight 007 was shot down over the USSR when it strayed into Russian airspace. That same year, Ronald Reagan issues a directive to make GPS freely available for civilian use. And 1989, the first GPS satellite for civilian use was launched. And by 1993, the 24th one was in orbit. And also that year, the World Wide Web essentially took off from that. And by 2013, GPS drives multi-billion-dollar industries. We're carrying it around in our pockets. We're relying on location for everything. The fact that it was opened up triggered a lot of innovations that would not have happened if it was closed. So this goes again to share it or lose it. It's kind of a trend that's happening. And obviously the internet is all about that as well too. Then if you look at technologies that are available today, if you think about opening up your smartphone and asking it what's the nearest restaurant in this area, it tells you, well, here are all the restaurants. here's a map with a dot on the map, and here are reviews of those restaurants, and here are directions on how you get there on the metro, and here are what your friends and others think about this restaurant. This is massive amounts of data basically at your fingertips in real time. And people have come to expect this level of functionality to the point that if the map is off, if the road is off, they say, what's wrong with this map? We wouldn't have expected that a few years ago. And this would have cost millions of dollars to do even 10 years ago, for example. This is actually, so is this, what type of a system is this? Is this a dashboard? Is this GIS? Is it BIM? Is it a facility application? It's enabled by GPS because it's location-based. It's all of the above. And we're kind of used to thinking of fragmenting things into silos that we all talk about. You know, you have managed facilities, you have GIS systems, you have BIMs, you have CAD. And we're used to thinking it in terms of kind of classifying things. But if you look at the end user, I don't really care what this is. I just know that I want to find a restaurant. So that's how the simplicity part of this is so important. It's important to make it simple enough that anybody can get to it no matter what tool you're using. And it's a mashup of a lot of applications. So I don't have to rebuild a mapping system. I don't have to fly up a satellite to find my location. I'm sharing resources, and it's a services-oriented approach that we can build applications on top of. And as we all know, in the last few years, everything has changed. Everything has changed as far as application development, what we expect to be carrying around with tablets. When the tablets first came out, people thought, oh, interesting, it could be a fun toy to work with. Now it's disrupting everything about how we're used to working with technologies. And even young kids now are going online and or creating applications on Androids and iPhones that would not have been easy to do just a few years ago. So that's one thing, that the simplicity part of getting to applications. Now imagine this, if you replace all these words and think about a facility, why can't we, if this technology is around, why can't we use it to say what system is in this building and how old is it and when's it going to be replaced and what floor am I on and how many square feet do I have and what's my roll-up of my portfolio nationwide? We're not there yet. We know that every owner is struggling with that, yet this technology is sitting right in front of us. And the challenge today actually is we need to get here really, really fast, or the building industry will become irrelevant as far as our ability to be in the 21st century. That's an opportunity that we're not there yet, that if we don't get there, we're losing potential value that we can provide from many different directions. So I think and as an architect, this has been a struggle for me. We started using BIM in 1993. I think, and as the AI Technology and Architectural Practice Chair, I think architects are very far behind of where we should be. We've kind of been waiting for owners to tell us what systems to use and waiting for the technology to be perfect. And that's really no longer acceptable. We have to be much more proactive. We have to look at what tools are out there and what capabilities we have to build that Yelp application for facilities. So that's an opportunity to break through the silos. The technologies have created revolutions, just that communication that when Twitter first came out, we thought, oh, it's a cute tool to kind of chat with your friends. Well, it topples governments now. It changes everything again, too. It's about that connection and the ability to work simply with tools that drive revolutions. David Hammond and Hassan are sitting across from here, but the Coast Guard, 10 years ago, we started working with the Coast Guard, and the vision really hasn't changed. It's the exact same vision from 10 years ago. How do we look at facilities and how do the requirements of the Coast Guard drive the need for facilities, and how do we manage this millions of square feet? How do we deal with standards? How do we deal with BIM, with GIS? And there was a series of projects that were triggered by the Coast Guard, both as actual implementations and visions, and they're ongoing today. And this is Coast Guard Academy. There's a lot going on Coast Guard wide right now with a lot of these technologies. There's a lot of pieces of things happening, and it's, again, similar challenges with everybody, how to bring it all together. This just came out in May 2013. This is online. McKinsey and Company put out a report called Disruptive Technologies, Advances That Will Transform Life, Business, and the Global Economy. And there's these items right here, all the way from number one is mobile. The mobile internet, again, is changing everything. We expect to get to our information on the go in simple formats. The automation of knowledge work, how do you connect the dots and automate a lot of the things that are very tedious to do. The Internet of Things, everything is starting to say what they are in a building, broadcasting out, I'm a mechanical system and here's the temperature in the room, things like that. Cloud technologies, and on. the reason we circled the red part up there is the CEPS projects with DoD and VA and DIML's projects, and the recommendations we looked at were kind of, a lot of them kind of centered around this. How do we move into this world? So this is saying it's coming our way, and it's coming a lot faster. It's already here pretty much. It's not coming, it's already here. So how do we deal with that? And there's numbers associated with it too, what's driving it. So if you look at the GPS example that I gave earlier, this stuff is going to drive a lot of business and a lot of opportunities for all of us if we're there. So again, we can't wait for it to come to us. We have to be proactive about getting there. And the potential impacts, so it's a pretty long report, not that long, but it's easy to read, well written, talking about the potential impact of what these technologies have. So this is about, I think, about 3,000 records that we all were used to looking at, and now this fits into something like that. So that's a dramatic shift of information and data from here to here at our fingertips. Building industry is still here. We need to be here, right? We all know that. We're kind of preaching to the choir here, but we just have to get there. And these mobile devices are changing the whole landscape of the IT world as well too. And the communications that are happening, this is a map, it's online, it's by Eric Fisher, Twitter map, basically communications that are happening around the world and the patterns that are allowing us to connect. And the technology is becoming transparent. This is already here pretty much. Google Glass is already out there. Imagine a heads-up display where we can look up and see things. It's already there. It's in development, and iPads are happening with that as well too. So imagine our data about our facilities and healthcare being at our fingertips and simple to use. That's the other key thing. As all of these pieces start coming together, if they're difficult to use, it's almost meaningless. We have to simplify, simplify, simplify to get to the complexity, because as you start stacking energy with cost, with facilities, with LIfecycle, it becomes impossible to manage it the way that we're doing today. And the built environment becomes kind of the natural user interface. The world around us is what's going to be talking to us and what we're needing to interact with. And our cities, the need to manage energy and sustainability is just also just so critical that we have to tackle this. As an architect, this is just a quote just from a few months ago. I was at a BIM forum. I almost went crazy when I heard this. This was a 3-day event talking about facilities and data and BIM, and everyone was really excited, and then an architect stood up and said, I did not sign up to manage data. I go, oh my gosh, if we don't get this tackled, yes, we did sign up to manage data. We're managing information. If we can't deal with it, we're in the wrong business. So we just have to move forward. And Steve Jobs says, if you don't cannibalize yourself, somebody else will, which is actually kind of interesting related to CEPS and DIMLs. CEPS and DIMLs are functioning tools, yet we were brought in to kind of disrupt the concept and say, what else can we do with this? There isn't really time to kind of, status quo is fine. They worked fine in the 90s and 20 years ago, 5 years ago, but now what happens when everything changes? Can we exist with this kind of approach if we don't cannibalize ourselves? So disruption and agile and lean. Agile development cycle. It used to take months, if not years, to develop the software solutions. And now they're happening in days or weeks or minutes sometimes. Because if you keep things simple and rely on services and not have to rebuild things from scratch, you're able to create solutions very quickly. And as an architect and a software developer, I see this as well. The real value is not the fact that you can code and create something. The real value is understanding what the industry needs as an architect, engineer, planner, owner, and then be able to create simple solutions around that. And also, Andy's going to be talking about this as well too, but the cost of developing a lot of this is plummeting as well too. And there's a lot of free or very low cost applications that used to cost thousands of dollars before to do, that we need to look at of how do we become more efficient at that to be able to innovate. This is actually and been referenced before in different reports, but this is interesting actually. The earthquake in 2012, the residents in New York read about the quake on Twitter 30 seconds before they experienced the quake. So this data essentially is predicting the future for us, right? If you start seeing patterns, the mounds of big data coming at us, if we can filter through it quickly, then we can react to it. If it's just a bunch of data like those records that we saw earlier, and you can't get to the song that you want, it's very frustrating today, but that was the status quo just a few years ago even. So that's the opportunity here for all of us. The work with SEPs and DIMLs, we identified it. There's a lot of drivers that are driving, that are pushing toward this, but one of them is there are GAO reports that say the planning and design and construction of healthcare facilities has to become more efficient. And this is not just VA, DoD, this is just industry-wide. It's not a very efficient process, as we all know. So there's opportunities there. A great document from the White House, this blue one on the upper left, Building a 21st Century Platform, written in plain English, it's not written in techie. It talks about how this all applies to the American people, or just population in general. What do we need to do with this data? How do we deal with it? What are the opportunities? There's a DoD IT modernization strategy as well that we looked at, and a whole bunch of other stuff that was referenced. I'll reference this quite a bit through the next few presentations as well too, but the White House strategy, the 21st Century Digital Strategy, this is one of the diagrams. We just absorbed this because this is exactly how our thinking was before we came into this as well too. Software in the past, or even in today, a lot of software is tightly bundled. In other words, the information, the data about what we do, whether it's design, construction, or operations and maintenance, is tightly bundled with the interface, that application. It's a black box. So you buy the application, you put your information in it, and you deal with that in that software application. What the White House is saying with this document is that the data has to be decoupled. It has to be split apart from the application, so it's neutral, and you can plug in any other application you want. And as a software developer, and with software out there, obviously from a business perspective, it's really good business to make the data fused with the application and force you to keep using that software. But it's not good as an end user to do that. And by separating it out and saying, I want my data as an owner down here, regardless of what software we use, and then we want software to plug in, just like that Yelp application. If we don't like mapping applications from Apple, we can use Google or Bing or whatever, or OpenStreetMap. You're plugging and playing different applications on top of the data, and therefore the data lives longer. So it's not trapped in that software. So there's a security layer wrapped around this. There's the data information layer, a platform layer that says here are the rules of how you get to the data, and there's a presentation layer of the application interface that says here's your iPhone or your Android or your desktop or whatever application you want to get to it. And then there's the customers. If you make it simple to use, then others can build presentation layers. That's what's happening. Why apps are taken off is because you can create different apps with different types of data and kind of merge things together to make new applications. So conceptually, there's data, there's security in the data, there's the platform, and it's currently, most software in the past has been kind of a black box. This is all kind of mixed in together. And then if you want to share data from one application to another, you have to figure out how to export and import from one to the next, and this is where the standards come in. Very important work that's happening at Building Smart is about how do we share information in a common format, IFCs and COBie and all that, and that's going to be important for a long time, and it will be. It's a foundation of how do we talk that common language, Omni class, all that. But it's still more or less today what's happening is that we're spending a lot of time sharing information among applications and importing and exporting like this. So this is really not a scalable solution. We really have to think of it in terms of, if we split using the White House strategy, we split the data apart, we have a platform layer, we have many different user interfaces, and you have security rules, and then you have many users that want to get to the data. And that's kind of the foundation of a lot of the recommendations that we worked on for SEPs. The DoD IT modernization strategy also talks about consolidating infrastructure, enabling agile IT. The same words again are kind of appearing in cloud, enterprise cloud, standard IT platforms, mobile applications, mobile first, things like that. If you look at their reports, it's the same type of description. Some of you have been involved with BIM storms. That from years ago we started working on how do we share this information collaboratively with many different tools. This is Penn State, John Messner's team. And this directly evolved into a lot of different projects, one of which was the California Community Colleges work. Community colleges, huge number of students, 2.4 million students in California, 5,200 buildings. They could not wait for all of their buildings to be in BIM before they started managing information about their facilities. So they're coming from two directions. It's not one or the other. It's not that we have to have a BIM to start managing facilities, but it also is if we have data about our facilities, they don't necessarily have to be in BIM, but we have to connect it in the middle. And how do we do things like calculate total square footage of buildings or laboratory space statewide? They have 75 million square feet. It's equivalent to 32 Empire State Buildings, and they have a system called Fusion. The reason I'm showing you this is this had a direct impact on when we were talking to VA and DoD of them saying if the California community colleges can link things together. In fact, let me let Fred talk here. Actually.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Fred Harris. I'm Assistant Vice Chancellor for the California Community College System. I oversee the facilities and fiscal compliance areas for our very large system. Welcome to this event. It's quite a pleasure to be able to at least virtually greet you and share a little bit of information regarding Fusion and what we've been able to accomplish within our confederation. Community colleges are 72 locally controlled districts. They all have locally elected boards, and they span the state. We probably have over 200 sites that are eligible for state capital outlay dollars. That's roughly 75 billion square feet in terms of the system itself. We've got close to 25,000 acres of land, 5,200 buildings, and 2.4 million students. Gathering probably close to 20–25% of the community college students within the country that are going to community colleges. But the story is really not so much about our largeness or our hugeness or the size of our system. It's more of what we've been able to operate on a collaborative basis and working with a variety of public and private partners, both the partners of our districts within the system who help fund the system initially and continue to maintain it, but also reaching out to public and especially other private vendors who are innovators and who can help us reach our goal of structuring our data and providing a means for adding value-added services to that data. So, I'm semi-geeky. There's only a certain degree that I can, talk in terms of all the technical side of this. But what I do understand is that it's a whole different business model that we need to be doing in this resource-constrained environment that's based on collaboration and openness and not on proprietary only and closed systems. Structuring your data in such a way that it'll allow for sharing of data among systems, on what's called a web services basis, that access and having an open standards capability is what Fusion has been based upon and is how it's growing. But, bottom line, we've been able to accomplish a lot on a shoestring. Again, it's just a handful of people that really are maintaining this system for this database system, this online database system for all of our colleges. But we rely on, again, based on collaboration, we rely on partnerships with others, and so we're always on the lookout for other partners, innovators who can basically, from our perspective in answering the question, what's in it for us, partnering with other folks and other innovators. That's really our R&D. We don't have a large staff to branch all this out, and so people who can operate in this environment of open standards and web services and understand the value of having that it's all about the data and not just the system, being able to connect data together to add value-added services, that whole model is what we're wanting to grow and we're reaching out for and what we're offering to share whatever we can in that particular regard. So it's, we're community colleges, we're all about education, at the higher education level. You kind of wonder how does that align with something such as healthcare. But again, we're focusing on that area of similarity dealing with facilities and the management of data relative to maximizing the use and minimizing the costs for both, building and maintaining your facilities. And I believe that if you haven't seen, what is about to be presented in some form or shape, and I know there are several community colleges that are participating in this, but for all the other folks, if you haven't seen this, I think, as you get into it, your socks are going to get knocked off on how to, the awesomeness of managing what I guess is called big data. Getting used to some of these terms, but this ability to basically approach complex issues in this way collaboratively That's basically what I can leave you with in terms of our message. And so we've been, very successful to date in terms of designing this. We're nowhere near done. We're constantly evolving, and again, that evolution is going to be dependent on how we could grow, not only with other partners like you. So wanted to mention in terms of also that Fusion has roughly right now 1,000 users, both the district folks and their consultants in terms of on the facility side throughout our system, and what our collaboration with the NUMA systems and what Fusion is being based on is really based on a BIM light model, but that notion of being BIM light is such that people don't really know they're using BIM, but they're gaining the benefits of it, and that's kind of the whole idea here, is that because you can go, as I've seen in terms of various architects and engineers, you can go pretty dark and deep relative to BIM, and people get lost and even alienated if they don't have a geeky side to them. But bottom line, our districts are, this modeling of our facilities, taking all of this tabular data, modeling it in a BIM-like format is really kind of the key of is kind of the foundation of the basis of how we're structuring this data and creating these value-added services. And we look forward to, for all of you who are far deeper in BIM and understand all that, but with the thought that we want to keep a more of a BIM-light approach, structured that in this way but not getting overly lost in BIM, we welcome your participation. Again, enjoy the presentation and the whole event, and I look forward to the fruits of all your labors, and I appreciate your attention and interest in the subject matter and furthering it along. Thank you very much.
So what happened, they received a FIATEC SETI award for this work. Out of all the owners that we've worked with, and everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, but what was unique about the California Community College is that essentially they have 5,200 BIMs right now. And when we started working with them, if you think about it from different users' perspective, different stakeholders, the facility person a lot of times would care less about BIM, could care less about software, could care less about a lot of things. We care a lot about BIM, but we approached it from the point of view of not even calling it BIM and saying, here's an interface that you can punch things up on an iPad or on a tablet and pull up information about your facilities. And it changed the way they looked at things because they started getting interested. And this actually even happened in the early Coast Guard work as well, too. If I'm managing a work order, I just care about the work order. And typically these things get fragmented into different systems. By having a common structure that I talked about earlier, allows you to plug them into each other. Essentially, each user is feeding data into the common platform and sharing that information across different types of users through what's called web services. So instead of taking data and saying, you have data about facilities, Fusion is facilities, they have GIS data, let's pull it into, we have our own system called the NUMA system. We could have said, give us all your data, we have an application, we'll take care of it. We said, no, you keep it in each system and you subscribe, just like the web works. We have services, we're publishing information about facilities, I'm publishing information about GIS, I'm publishing about BIM, and I could use any application I want to get to that. And now there's different vendors and consultants that are plugging into this in the community college's work. So that's been pretty interesting. It just gives us a different way to work with this information. And Balfour Beatty was involved too. So there's detailed BIMs coming in as well, if they are available, but we don't have to wait for 5,200 BIMs before we start managing energy for the whole state. So this is a mashup of GIS and facility data and different levels of detail. You don't have to have it all at the same level of detail. And you can view energy centers, for example, in different interfaces as well on the web and Google Earth, and code is generated on the fly. So all this stuff, the challenge with a presentation like this is there's so many different pieces that I can't cover everything, and it gets very difficult to kind of think of, well, do we need to know all of this? You don't need to know all of this. You just need to know that your piece plugs in. It's just like saying, do you have an email address? If you don't have an email, are you on CompuServe only? Well, it used to be CompuServe, and AOL had their own little ecosystems, and now with the internet, basically you can be on any email system and communicate with each other. So knowing that we're all talking in a common format allows us to kind of work from our perspective. So if you're doing program requirements and you want to bring it into building, you could use tools and say, here are the program requirements. And at the state level, if they say, well, we don't care about the floor plan of the building, we just don't want to know how many square feet we have to budget for next year. They want to see it at the state level, at the map level, and say, give us dots on a map and how much budget's coming. So this is the kind of interaction that's been happening with Fusion. And that data being on any device in any format. So from the community college's perspective, the reason they've been successful is start with the data you have. In other words, you don't have to throw away what you have. You don't have to take all your data and put it into another application. You can start with what you have. Use common open standards, share data via web links, keep it simple and intuitive. In other words, BIM, unfortunately, as an architect I see this too, BIM is amazingly detailed. It could be amazingly detailed. We kind of get stuck in that, wow, it's really cool and we want to get all this detailed data. Important for design and construction, absolutely useless for other applications. So keeping it simple allows us to kind of hit the whole state and using advanced tool and existing tools.